Today I'm talking to Bob Morrell. Bob, it's
Hello,
good to see you again. So
good to be on.
last time we spoke about all the stuff. Yeah, it was we spoke about stuff before, didn't we, when you were on last about
Yes,
what you do. But you've been doing something interesting, haven't you, regarding walking long distances.
well,
So
indeed. So I spotted that you yourself had been on a pilgrimage or two,
yeah,
and I thought, well, I better inform you that last year I walked the Camino de Santiago, which is um, one of the most popular pilgrimage routes, and there are lots of routes, but the one I took last year starts in Saint-Jean in the south of France, goes over the Pyrenees and then across Spain to Santiago. And I've recently done one from Porto as well. So I've done two pilgrimages in the last year. So it was a big-ish thing. And I thought it would be nice to have a chat about the subject of pilgrimage in the modern world and what it actually is.
yeah. So this is interesting, this because I did the I did this walk, which was the old way
Mm-hmm.
from Southampton to Canterbury, and obviously I
Yeah.
did it in installments. You know, I did
Mm-hmm.
it in,
Mm-hmm.
park the car up, walk to section, walk back. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, I did the walk twice,
Okay.
but over a period of time.
Yeah.
Um, but I'd sort of set the the thing of not taking a lot of stuff with me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, not taking any any food or any water.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, by the end of the walk, I'd go and have a drink and whatever.
Yeah.
But it would have been a number of hours without any of that, unless I could find, forage food on the way.
Yeah.
I don't mean going into a shop and buying something, but you know, um, getting some blackberries or something like that, or
Mm-hmm.
finding an apple tree,
Mm-hmm.
that type of thing.
Mm.
Um, but what I did you sort of, when you did the first,
Mm-hmm.
have any inkling to the psychological aspect of what that would be like?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that it would be a challenge psychologically. I mean, it was a challenge physically. I mean, I'm not, exercise and me are not easy bedfellows at any stage. But it was going to be a challenge anyway. The reason I did it was because my life had changed significantly in the previous year or two. And I thought I'd always wanted to do it. So I thought if I'm going to do it, now's the time. But actually, I wasn't alone there. There were lots of people who were doing the walk for resets of different types. So, career change, life change, got over something. And of course, a good third do it for religious reasons. It is a Catholic pilgrimage, which lots of Catholics do for that reason. But the majority do it for personal reasons. However, I wasn't prepared for what it actually did to me over that period, which was a surprise.
Mm, mm. That's an interesting one. Again, I was going into this because I'd not been well,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I was also going through quite a different, a difficult time one way or another. And I used to do a lot of walking.
Mm-hmm.
Was that something that you used to do?
No, no, and that's the I think that's the point that I I mean I tried to prepare for it. So I did a few longish walks in our area to kind of get myself physically ready to do it. But I didn't do enough.
No.
And I knew that it was going to affect me psychologically, but really that's the reason I've just done another one, is because I think in terms of something that's therapeutic, something that's cathartic, the act of walking does that. It's something about the
Yes.
physical act of walking, engaging the brain,
Yes.
and it's very, very positive, and you're
Yes.
moving towards somewhere as well, so you have an objective. But it is amazing how your brain shifts in that process, I think.
It is.
Mm.
I, in the process of me doing this, I realized that sort of the mechanics of walking has an incredible physical effect because you are using its core muscles,
Yeah,
and you get to that point where you're not thinking about the walking. The walking is doing the walking for you,
yeah,
if you sort of mean. And then certain aspects of that are very difficult to do. Walking over certain types of terrain is really difficult. Like, for instance, walking along a beach, which is shingle or sand.
yeah,
It's,
yeah,
it makes it 10 times worse than if you were just walking along normally,
yeah,
walking up hills and down hills. And all of these things you don't think about when you're just going out for a stroll, but you certainly do when you think, I've got a long way to go.
yeah,
And in the end,
yeah,
you sort of mentally give up thinking.
yeah.
Um, and that's a good thing because then you're just
Sure.
in that process, aren't you?
Well, I must say, I did almost give up because the first day on the Camino Frances is over the Pyrenees.
Right,
So, um, the highest peak in the UK is Ben Nevis, which is 1,300 odd meters. And on the first day of the Camino, you go over the Pyrenees, which is about 1,450 meters. So you're going up higher than Ben
right,
Nevis on your first day, and then you're
right.
coming down about 700 meters vertically. You're leaning back to get to the first
Ah,
place.
that's
And I,
awful.
and I got to the first monastery where you sleep, and I fell into this place. I was absolutely exhausted, dripping in sweat, and this nice lady looked after me and gave me some water, and I went up in the shower and I stood in the shower for 40 minutes. Okay. And I actually thought, if I just got a bus to Barcelona and lay on a beach for a few weeks, who,
Yes.
who would know? You know?
Yes. Yeah.
And I just thought, I've bitten off way more than I can chew here. This is too challenging. However, I did stick with it. And a few weeks later, there was another mountain called Osabrero, which is an incredible mountain as you enter Galicia. And I virtually hopped up that thing. I mean, it was challenging, but it was nothing because I'd done 3 or 4 weeks
Yeah.
of walking. I
Yeah.
was fitter, and it was held no fear for me.
Yeah.
Whereas that
That,
first morning, I was terrified.
that is great because one of the things that I became really aware of was how your body's capacity for repair and then preparation for that task happens so very quickly.
Mm,
So, you could be like, feeling almost like you're crippled.
yeah,
Yeah. But after a night's sleep, you might be a bit sort of stiff the next morning, but once you get going,
yeah,
it's okay.
amazing. It is amazing.
It
Well,
is amazing.
yeah, and the body goes, "Oh, you're doing that again, are you? Okay."
Yes.
And so it just adapts, and off you go. And before you know it, you've done 10 kilometers. I mean, it is extraordinary. Um,
It is extraordinary.
it is. But then I think that's what made me want to do another, because I don't think anything else gives you that same satisfaction. You know, you
Yeah.
can go to the gym, you can, and there's lots of things that people do to sort of make themselves feel better, mindfulness, meditation, all that sort of stuff. But I think there is something physical and meditative about walking a long distance, because you've got nothing else to do but meditate. And okay, you might meet people and chat to them for a bit. And on the Camino, there's lots of that. There's lots of people. I mean, 400,000 people do it a year. So if you're at the wrong time of year, it
All
can be
right.
very, very busy. Yeah. Um,
Right.
but then there are times when you're entirely on your own. And I don't think I was totally prepared for that. I knew I would be, but I didn't realize to what extent. And the reason I the reason I did it, and the reason I wrote a book about it, was because there were things that I had in my life that I hadn't really dealt with. And this is the thing which I
Right.
think is important. You know, if anyone's thinking of doing something like this, a sort of physical challenge on your own, then what happens is we all have things in our life which happen, and we think to ourselves, I can't deal with that right now. I'm going to put
Yeah.
that to one side and I'm going to deal with it
Yeah.
later. And then we never do. And it sits there festering as this sort of unresolved sequence of events that you haven't properly emotionally dealt with. So then you go on this walk and you're walking along and you've got nothing else to do. So then you go, okay, come on then, let's take this thing and let's really think about it. And sometimes it's really hard, going back over old memories, what one should have said, what one did say, what you should have done, what you
Yeah.
didn't do, all those things.
Yeah.
And I don't think you necessarily resolve these things, but I do
No.
think you work on them in a way that you probably wouldn't in other circumstances. And
Mm.
so over time, you sort of gently free yourself of these things. And actually, not only do you become lighter as a person as the weight drops off you when you're sweating your backside off halfway across Spain, but also
Mm.
emotionally it becomes lighter as well, because
Yeah.
somehow you've shifted some of this stuff out. That's my experience anyway.
Yeah. And my experience as well, actually,
Mm,
interestingly,
mm,
because you often hear people say it gives you a chance to put things in perspective, which I think
yeah,
is perhaps not the best way to explain experience, but it does sort of give you a feel of what's going on with that. Um, because as you say, things like that, that you park somewhere,
yeah,
and then you sort of ignore. You might think that they've gone away intellectually, but they haven't gone away because they actually inform unconsciously the decisions that you make later, right? And I
totally.
don't think they go away.
No.
But when you get a chance to spend time with them, there's a Buddhist um, process called feeding your demons,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is a little bit like this, where you spend time with the things that you find troubling,
Yeah, yeah,
um, and in a way that you can speak to them and sort of find a place for them to live.
okay,
And it's sort of like what you're going over things and talking them, in your mind, talking them through, even maybe out loud if you're walking
yeah,
alone,
yeah,
about the things you should have said or the things you didn't
yeah,
say and
yeah,
all that. It's sort of like finding a place for that,
mm,
all those uncharted bits that you didn't do.
yeah,
And I think that's really, really valuable. And you can only do that when you get into that sort of zone of walking.
yeah,
You could
yeah,
do that swimming, I'm guessing. There's something more physical repetition
mm,
that gives you
mm,
a chance to to clear your mind.
Yeah.
And would you, and you wouldn't have expected that, would you, on your
No.
walk? No.
I mean, I knew that it was gonna be affecting
Yes.
because there were specific reasons why I was doing it.
Yeah.
Um, but well, one thing I know is that the walk did its job,
Yeah.
and the reason I know that is because um, 2 weeks into the walk, it was tough physically, tough emotionally. It was very hot. My feet were shot to bits. I mean, I've got pictures of my feet. I didn't think some of my toes were going to survive. I mean, they were absolutely shot to bits after 2 weeks. And it was a real tough time. And at that point, the thought of arriving at the destination of Santiago, you walk into this huge square in front of this beautiful cathedral. And even if you're not religious, it's an immensely spiritual experience to walk into that
Yeah.
square.
Yeah.
The thought of
Yeah.
walking into that 2 weeks in was enough to break you. You know, you thought, oh, it's if I
Yeah.
feel this emotional now, what's it going to be like when I get
Yeah.
there? However, when
Yeah.
I did get there, I was a little emotional, but nothing like what I thought I would be. And the reason I think that is because I left it on the road. You know, the walking did the job
Yes.
of taking the
Yes.
stuff and leaving it behind, and I actually
Mm.
felt a little renewed as I walked in,
Mm.
which is something I
Yeah.
didn't think, and it has changed me, Vic. I mean, it really has changed me a lot, and continues to.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and it's interesting. Some people say, you know, how can you spare 5 weeks of your life to go and do that? How can you carve out that time to go and do it? And the truth was, I was going to go later than I did, and I realised that life was getting busy, and I thought if I don't go now, I'll never go. So I just left. I just
Yeah.
got on the plane and went.
Yeah.
And having now done it, I can absolutely see the value of that experience from a psychological perspective. So much so that I've done another shorter one this year from Porto, because you do get that feeling of advancement
Mm.
and clarity. There's something about it which I haven't found anywhere else.
No.
So there it is.
One of the things that struck me about walking is this is something that we would have always done.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah,
now we don't do it. It's only recently we don't do that. Um, but you would have walked everywhere,
yeah.
or you would have, if you were rich enough, you'd have a horse. But but generally you would have walked everywhere. So if you
Yeah,
go back far enough, the whole tribe would have walked, right? So
yeah.
it's obviously what we're designed to do. And
Mm,
when they did all this, when they first started doing all this brain scanning
yeah.
stuff, and there was a lot of research about, what is what's really going on in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
They come up with this thing that actually the brain is designed to operate movement, not to come up with great thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
This ability to judge distances in space and all that type of
Yeah,
thing,
yeah,
meaning like where you're going to put your foot and all that sort of stuff.
yeah,
And you
yeah,
think, well, that's fascinating. If that is, we're designed to move, and therefore we're designed to maybe move and think,
yeah,
right? Which goes
yeah.
back to the whole idea of the Greek peripatetic teachers, who would walk and speak, the Socrates and all those sort of people,
Aristotle,
Aristotle.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. So by reconnecting to that, we are wired up to do this. We're wired up to walk great distances. It's just that because we haven't done it very much, we get the problems of, our feet falling like they're feeling like they're going to drop off type of
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
But
Um, well, I was just going to say on that, I mean, the Aristotle thing is a good one. The other quote I found by Friedrich Nietzsche, he
yeah,
said, all truly great thoughts are conceived while walking.
There we go.
There you go. And I think there is something in that, because
Yeah.
you do get ideas, you do get inspired. Um, I had an amazing playlist last year of great music, and that's clearly an important thing. Some people have no music or anything like that. I just listened to a certain playlist that I created. This year, my son did a playlist for me of random songs that I had no idea what was going to be on there, and it was absolutely fantastic to just have. It was like, the best DJ ever, just giving you song after song,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
had different meanings, different feelings, and so my memory of certain places is
Yeah.
enhanced by a new song and a new thing. And I think that's quite nice. And some people don't think that's sort of, you shouldn't mar the experience with music. I think if you're on your own, it's nice to do it with music, because it sort of
Well,
gives you something.
well, to be honest, I think you when you go on something like that, you're taking yourself,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Which means you're taking all of those aspects of yourself. Do you
Mm,
like listening to music, or do you not like listening to music?
yeah.
And that's part of the experience of yourself, isn't it?
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's not really a case of whether you should or you shouldn't. It's a case of whether what is it that you do,
Yeah.
right? And again, if you think about Chaucer's Canterbury Tales,
Mm.
they weren't all walking in silence. Sometimes they're telling dirty jokes to one another. Or it seemed like most of the time they were telling dirty jokes to one another, right?
Definitely, definitely.
So
Yeah.
it certainly wasn't necessarily a religious experience even back then. It was an
No.
experience, and it's
Yeah.
a spiritual experience. But if you got people telling tales of you know how many husbands they'd had and all the rest of it,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, um, they sort of give you that sort of idea that people have always been the same. Whether are you walking
Yeah.
alone? Are you telling yourself stories? Are you listening to an audio book, which
Yeah.
is to our Chaucer's thing, or are you just listening to songs?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I did think about that a lot, that if you were an original pilgrim, so you go back, 1,000 years, you'd have been dressed very shabbily. You wouldn't have washed. You would have had very little uh, money, really, to do a pilgrimage like that. You'd have been living on not much food every day, um, staying in these monasteries, huts, really. It would have been so hard, but it was seen as a penance. You were doing it to absolve yourself of sins. And actually, I when I went on the first one, the day I arrived in Santiago, I went to the mass, in the pilgrim's mass in the cathedral that everyone goes to. And there's a huge thing called the Butafiniero, which is a massive incense holder. And these monks pull on this rope, and this thing flies around this cathedral, showering you with incense. And it's an experience to watch it. And my lady I work with, her daughter said, "Well, now that you've been to a mass after a pilgrimage, technically you are absolved of all sin." And I thought, wow, God, I thought my soul was well past redemption, but I'll take that. So
Yeah,
so that gives you the feeling that you would have been through all that hardship. You know, over
yeah,
1,000 years, people have been doing that walk, mostly walking on bare feet, or very limited footwear, and you would have got there, you'd have feel exhausted, but there would be that feeling of absolution at the end of it. And you can see, if that's your belief, you can see the appeal of it,
yes,
because it's an experience, and
yes,
you're unlikely to do it more than once in your life. So it actually is probably heightened as an experience,
mm,
uh, from that
mm,
process. Now, of course, there's hostels every 10, 15 kilometers. It's very well organized. Um, it's the closer you get, the more commercial it gets. So anybody who walks from 100 kilometers out can get a certificate to say they've done it, and that rubs longer the distance pilgrims up the wrong way a bit, because you're walking in relative ease for weeks, and then suddenly there's hundreds of people heading in the same direction. You think,
Yeah.
hang on a minute.
Yes.
Um,
But this has always been the case
yeah, yeah,
historically, hasn't it?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
you used to get people selling badges.
yeah,
We think of badges as a modern thing.
yeah, yeah.
Because they're not. They're really old idea
Mm,
that you would get a badge or a medallion to say that you'd visited the church of so and so and
yeah, yeah,
paid some money for that, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, right the way back in the Middle Ages, they were doing this and making money and selling figurines and goodness knows what of the saint of the church, whatever.
Mm,
Um, but of course, you were saying about hostels. The
mm.
word hostel, of course, comes from the idea of the hospital, which
Yes.
was where if you go to Canterbury, of course, there is the hospital
Mm,
where people going to the cathedral who'd walked the pilgrimage would have gone and slept
mm.
because you weren't rich enough to, you know.
Sure.
So the whole idea of hospitality and everything comes from
Yeah.
this thing, and the hostels and all the rest of it. So, maybe the sort of concerns of people thinking, oh my goodness, these people have only done the last 100 miles to Jerusalem. I've I've had to sail across the Mediterranean, avoiding
Yeah.
bandits and
Yeah.
goodness knows what else and whatever, and they're going to get absolution.
Yeah.
How dare they?
Yeah. Yeah. It is a bit like that. You do
Yeah,
get a bit. You do get a bit of that.
yeah,
But then, I having now done the second one, it was much more, because it was only 2 weeks. It was more of a walking holiday,
yeah,
and so it's geared up for that, and it's perfectly pleasant. It's
yeah,
not the same as the full 5 weeker.
yeah, yeah,
That has so many different challenges. I mean, the point of the hospital is a good one. After 2 weeks, I almost did go to hospital with my feet, because they were just so had it. And so I just loaded up on proper EU strength painkillers, and got a cushion thing for my boots, and just kept on going and threw the painkillers down, and it just about survived. And then within 3 weeks, your feet start to harden,
yeah.
and it becomes far more bearable. But you've got to go through that agony first. And everyone says, oh, you might not get blisters. You are going to get blisters. I even got blisters in two
Yeah, yeah,
weeks. With nice new shoes that were very, very comfortable. You're going to get blisters if you're doing 20 plus kilometers a day, but
yeah, yeah.
it's just having the stuff, and keeping going.
Do you know? Is that not like learning to play the guitar? My
It is,
fingers
isn't
hurt.
it? Yeah,
It
yeah,
is. Yeah,
that's
it is.
right. And
It
then your
is.
then your fingers get harder, and then it's
Yeah,
fine. And you just think, wow, God, it's taken me a bit of time. That's so true. It's so true. Having said that,
yeah.
though,
No.
um, so because I've now done a second, what I've realised is that the Camino, in long walk terms, is a bit of a warm bath. As hard as it can be, it's so well organized and so well put together. And you can start in Le Puy in France, you can start in Germany, you can start in Paris, you can start all over Europe if you want, and do that walk. Okay,
Mm.
it's well established, and there are hostels, hotels, people camp along the way. Um, but there are so many other walks. And I've recently done a lot of research into walks through Italy, um, Scandinavia, um, down into the Balkans. There are some incredible walks that you can do. And I think now I've done two relatively organized walks. When I say organized, nothing's booked. You literally just turn up and
No.
start walking and find yourself a hostel at the end of the day. Um, I think I now am in the mood to be challenged by different landscapes, different places, different cuisines, maybe something that's less organized, maybe something that is a little bit more mountainous. I never thought I'd ever say that, but
Mm,
it's because you realize that it's okay. What goes up must come down. What goes flat forever will eventually go up. There's always variation, but there's so much beauty. When you go across Spain, northern Spain is stunning, and I would
mm.
never have gone there had I not done this walk. It's absolutely beautiful. I went to a beautiful city called Burgos that I'd never really heard of. I knew it existed, but I didn't know anything about it. It was stunning. It's the most beautiful city, and I can't believe it's not on everyone's city break list. It's just a really beautiful Spanish city, and that's just one country. And so then you think, well, Portugal has got these incredible beaches and lovely towns like Porto, which is incredible. But actually, I now realize that Italy has incredible towns and villages and hills and mountains and varied options available. And France has incredible walks across the Massif Central and all those sorts of areas. There's so many places that you can walk, and of course, England has a mountain of walks that still exist. And I've done half of the
Exactly.
South Downs Way, so there's so many
Yes.
more to do.
Yeah. So obviously the walks I've done, because I'm doing another one, which is the St. Augustine Camino, which goes
Right.
from Rochester out to Ramsgate.
Okay.
Um, and what's fascinating with those walks that you just, like you're saying, you discover places that you didn't realize existed, even in a place that you know.
Mm.
So obviously the other one, the old way, going across the South Downs, the
Yeah.
churches are unbelievable, ancient,
Yeah.
um, astonishing bits of architecture.
Mm.
Uh, and some of them you walk in,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't go inside every church, but occasionally I'd sort of go in and
Mm.
just sort of, sniff out the place. And you go into some, you go, "Ooh, old church,"
Mm-hmm.
and then you'd walk into another one, and it was like you've got something different.
Mm.
It's like you were in another place,
Mm-hmm.
utterly silent,
Mm.
utterly silent. Um, Almost made you feel like you never wanted to leave it.
Mm.
And,
Mm.
and and it didn't have to be an old church for that to happen. Often it was, but some of the old churches didn't have that at all.
Mm-hmm.
So then it was a bit like, well, that's really strange that this one could feel like that.
Mm.
Another one can just feel like this. And you can go to other places that are. I mean, there's one on that walk which is um, on the Bay of Tapestry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and you sort of think, well, it's just amazing. So this is just one bit of this is just down in the south, right?
Mm.
Um, but then, of course, as far as you go north, as you say, there's just so many places that you can go. So the only thing I would say about walking here is the weather,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? I know obviously that's could be an issue anywhere, but I mean
Mm.
particularly here, that a lot of rain, it makes it very hard. Um, and I don't particularly like walking through rain anyway, but
Mm.
even if it's rained a lot in the success, in sort of previous days, some bits of it are just waterlogged.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't mean just like there's big puddles. I mean it's like a river. Um, so yeah, I can see why the pilgrims back in medieval times would wait to the spring.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You're
Absolutely.
walking that in the winter.
Yeah.
Did you get any bad weather?
Yeah. And on the few occasions that it rained hard. And when you get into Galicia, Um, Galicia is northwest Spain, and if you look at it, it's sort of directly beneath Ireland. It's not that far from Cornwall, really. Millions of years ago would have all been joined together,
Yeah,
and the landscape is very similar. You sometimes you
yeah,
feel like you're walking through Wales or Cornwall.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And what happens in Galicia is it always rains,
Yes.
always.
Well,
So you know you're going to get some
yeah,
torrential downpours, and what I had was a cap with a waterproof jacket, and once I had that on, once it wasn't driving into my face, I was okay, and then I could just keep going through it. But after if to have it for, I mean, I never had it for more than a day and a half. To have it for more than that, I think is going to become a bit depressing. But then
yes,
if you're under your own steam, you can always choose to have a day off. And
yes,
I had a couple of days off for my first one, and it was brilliant. And
yeah,
just had a nice day, went around a few bars, and I highly recommend a pub crawl in the Spanish
yeah.
city. It's it's
Yeah.
it's it's good.
That's a good idea. Good strategy, Bob.
Exactly, exactly. But this time it was a little different coming up from Portugal because it's mostly along the beach. And but what is interesting is that you go from Portugal to Spain, and there's a little river, and you go across on a boat. It's only half a mile. But in that half a mile, you go from Portugal to Spain, and your clock changes by an hour because Portugal's on the same time as Britain. The moment you go into Spain, even though it's half a mile, you suddenly go forward an hour. And that's quite bizarre that there's that big shift. And it's interesting, the landscape somehow changes as well. But there's something about Portugal which was slightly more barren, slightly more primitive, slightly more um, I don't know. It just had a different atmosphere. The moment you get into Spain, there's something about it which feels different, looks a bit more medieval, looks a bit more. There's more donkeys running around. It's just it's like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's like someone said, "Oh, let's make them really feel they're in Spain and put some things out to make them feel that." And you do. Everything sort of shifts a bit. So
yeah.
that's very nice.
So you were mentioning you've written a book. Is it one
Mm.
book or two? One.
I've written one book which is a tips book, so top 12 tips for walking the Camino de Santiago. So that's just a short guide, which is downloadable. The big one is called Truth and Heresy on Bobby's Camino,
Cool.
available on Amazon.
Lovely.
And that is all about why I was doing the walk, what I experienced, who I met, all the characters. I actually made a very good friend. I made lots of good friends, but one strong friend I made was a chap called Hugh. He's an actor, and listeners will recognise him. He plays Nessa's father in Gavin and Stacey, if you ever watched that. He's an
All
older
right.
Welsh actor. And he reminded me of a chap you and I know and remember, a chap called Tony Haygarth, who I'm sure you would have
Yeah,
come across at some point. And he
yeah,
was an old friend of mine, and
yeah.
Hugh was very similar. And we just became very good friends, and we walked together a lot last year. And we arrived in Santiago together, and we're still friends, close friends now. And he was doing it for very, very personal reasons, and we just clicked. And that happens a lot as well. So anybody who's thinking of doing something like this, you are going to meet people. It might take a week or two, but
Mm.
the pace that you walk, and you know that works out after a few days, because you might start off quick and then slow down and then have a day off
Yeah,
and then whatever it may
yeah.
be. And after about 10 days, you you kind of form a sort of loose group of people that you see here and there, and
Mm.
that's when the friendships start. And that is a good thing. And the one thing I will say about doing a Camino, you meet people from all over the world, literally, and you meet people of all ages, literally from 19 to 80. And everyone sits in the evening and chats and talks. And I've never experienced that before, that idea of an ageless group of people. There was one girl there who was 19, American, and she did this one with me recently as well. And I just thought, what an amazing thing for her at 19 to have done 2 long walks where she's made friends from all over the world, of all ages. Where else would you get that opportunity in such a positive way? It's a really great thing to do. So I think that's the other side of it. I think pilgrimage has a community built in because you're all doing the same thing, you're all heading in the same direction. And 99.9% of the time, they're nice people. You know, they're doing
Yeah.
it for good reasons. They're doing it because it's a positive step. It's because it's something that they feel is important to them. And because you have that, there is a fraternity and an immediate trust that I think perhaps you wouldn't get on other sorts of trips. So that's another
Yeah.
recommendation.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. You've got sort of like-minded aspect
Mm-hmm.
to this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you think about something else where people are trapped on a journey,
Mm-hmm.
like a cruise, that wouldn't be quite the same, would it?
No, no,
Yeah.
no. And you can
If you
always
saw
go and
me,
hide.
yeah,
Yeah,
yes, just you can't hide on a pilgrimage on the
no,
road.
no.
So what would you, if somebody said to sort of praise you that book,
Mm-hmm.
what would you say as your elevator pitch?
I mean, it is an honest account of the journey in every sense. I haven't held anything back in
No.
terms of what it was actually like. So if anyone's thinking, "Oh, that sounds like a fun, easy thing to do," definitely read this book, and it will
Yes,
sort that out for you.
yes, yeah, exactly.
But the other thing, the reason it's truth and heresy, there are lots of Facebook groups of walkers on these walks, and I'm a member of many of them. And there are hardships, which everyone talks about, and there are also little annoyances, like the fact that 20,000 people converge on the route on the day you get within 100 kilometers at the end. You know, that is an annoyance. And for some people, if you say that on these groups, you get shouted down. How dare you, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
diminish this experience for others? But it's the
yeah,
truth.
yes,
That is what it's like, and
yeah,
you're better to be prepared for it than not. And so I've just put a few things in there which just said, look, this is going to happen. From 100 kilometers out, people arrive in immaculate outfits with beautiful new shoes. They have minibuses that pick them up at certain points and take them to nice places to stay. It's an organized tourism thing from that point. And if it's heresy to say that, I'm sorry, but it is the truth. And if you want to make sure you get a bed for the night, you have to book ahead. And there's things like that which are just
yeah, yeah,
essential. You're going to be sleeping in the street. And so I think that's the point, that whilst this is a wonderful experience, as a human, there are elements to it which is just as well to point out. And I would, and in fact, the one I've just done, I would say, as wonderful as an experience as it was, um, once you get within 100 kilometers, it becomes a commercial enterprise. And I can understand why they do it. It's a huge draw, and I can see why wouldn't you? Because it is, it is appealing for an economy to have these people coming in and spending their money. But there is there's a very thin line between that desire and it just becoming incredibly, it's, I mean, I don't want to use the word, but you've seen the pictures of people on Everest lining up to get to the summit, okay, because that's now what that's become. And I
yeah.
think
A
this,
pilgrimage of sorts. Yeah,
exactly, and this wonderful experience of walking in relative solitude with small numbers of people suddenly becomes not that. And I think as long as you're aware and ready for that, you can deal with it and manage it. If you're not, it could ruin the experience for you. And some people think, well, you shouldn't say that because it's for different people to come to that judgment. I understand. But if you've been walking in relative solitude for 4 weeks, and then suddenly there's 600 people going up a hill in front of you. How can that not affect you? You just think,
Oh yeah,
whoa,
exactly.
this is a different ball game. And there's other things, because I think also what also happens is that you get into a rhythm, and you just think, I'm getting faster now, and I'm fitter than I was. And actually 18 kilometers a day is dead easy. So I'll go 28 tomorrow, which means you're getting there even quicker. And every few kilometers, there's a marker which shows you how far you've got to go. And as you get towards the end, it goes down really quickly. And you think, well, I don't want this to end. And I think people need to understand that this is an incredible experience, but towards the end, naturally it's going to get quicker, because you're getting quicker, you're getting fitter, you're walking longer distances. And again, you're then with people, and you think, well, if they finish before me, I'm not going to see them finish, and I'd like to see them when I finish, so I need to keep up with them. And they're thinking, well, I need to keep up with him because I want to finish with him and be there at the end with that person. And so what generally happens is that a group of sorts forms naturally. And again, it's that community thing. Now, some people say, well, you shouldn't say that because it might not be like that for certain people. I don't know anyone who that wasn't the case for. Some of us hang around Santiago for 3 days, seeing people come in because we wanted to see them at the end of their walk. So I think that's the other side of it, is that your experience shifts the perception of what it is there for.
Yeah.
Having said that, since then I've been on many walks over the Downs, and I live right by the Downs in Lewis, and I can go right over to the sea and over towards Alfriston and that area there, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I
And
know the area really well.
yeah, and what I believe is that once you've done a decent walk, then all walking has a value, has a meditative
Yeah.
response, but also you appreciate it so much once you get up on those downs and you're walking along, and the sea is to your right, and there's a view around you, and it's just stunning, actually. And you don't need much. You don't
No.
need much. A banana, a bit of water, you can go for miles and miles.
Yeah.
And I think, back to the original point, how can that not be good for you, for your brain, for your body, for everything else? There's something innate in that, which I now want to do a decent long walk every year somewhere.
Mm.
I don't really mind where it is.
Mm.
I'm not really a camper, so I don't really want to have to pitch a tent.
No.
But if I can get a bed every night, then I'm pretty game. And I never thought I would become that. So there we are.
That's interesting. So some of the sort of the pilgrimage walks in this country, I mean, there's a lot of them on the established pilgrimage walks where some of the churches can put you up.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a little bit Spartan, as you can imagine. But on that area that you're talking about, Firle Church is open to
Yeah.
people, and a lot of them on the South Downs. I think it's not Littlehampton, and it's all that sort of area. So you could stay in these little churches, and obviously there's Airbnbs and all the rest of it. Um, and it's obviously difficult camping in this country, wild, because you're not supposed to do that anyway. But you wouldn't really want to, particularly, to be frank.
No.
But I think that there are lots of things happening now that makes that possible. And of course, the great benefit is in all the miles that I walked, I only met who were walking on that route. Of course, you meet people walking their dogs and stuff like that. But I met somebody near, where was that? It was on the way to Battle. again, she was doing all this one long walk. She had a
Mm.
rucksack and all the rest of it. So that was her, and then I met somebody else later, and that
Hmm.
was it.
Amazing.
So if people want solitude, in answer to
Yeah.
the Facebook people, um,
Yeah.
then that is it's a good one. But
Well,
yeah, so what would you say? And this is a terrible question to ask, but I think it's
mm,
worth asking. What would you say is the great takeaway from takeaway is probably not the right word, but for you that you didn't expect or was more than you expected as your experience?
um, okay. I didn't expect to be hopping up a mountain 4 weeks into this walk with enthusiasm, getting to the top of a mountain and feeling I could easily do another kilometer up. That was a real shock to a guy who has basically lived a life of debauchery for 50 years. That was a real shock. But also, um, yeah, okay. So the real thing is this. I think I briefly returned to someone that I once was.
Great.
And that is the thing, because when you're on your own, any facade that one puts up for the world disappears.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a bit surprising. You think, God, who's that person? Who's that bloke? I don't recognize him. And in fact, the last time I did anything like this, I was 19 and I went backpacking around Europe on Interrail, and I went to America and did the same. And it reminded me of that person, the guy of 19 who, just went on an adventure and was just open to whatever was going to happen. And I think that must be surely the reason we do it, is how can I find out who I'm supposed to be? Who am I now? Who is this person? What do I know about myself? And if you can do that, it does change you. It has changed me. People have said to me, "You're a different person after that." And if I am good, and I continue to do that work, I know it's a long work in progress, but I would rather be in that process of reminding myself who I was, and trying to be a better version of that, rather than the person I was before I went on the walk, who was just a confused individual trying to escape, you know? So I think that's the thing. A reacquaintance with who you are is probably
Mm.
no bad thing for anyone. What about
Yes.
you? What did you get?
Yeah, yeah. Very similar. Very
Mm,
similar. Saying about that thing about the thing that you did many, many moons
mm,
ago.
mm.
I used to do um, like the sort of Duke of Edinburgh chase, which was orienteering at night.
Yeah, yeah.
And we used to train for that.
Hmm.
So we would do 15 miles, plus 20 miles at night as
Wow.
a team, just sort of careering across the Kent countryside.
Yeah.
Um, and it's got that power of reconnecting you with yourself at an earlier point in time.
Yeah.
And there's been lots of interesting experiments where people have been put in environments that emulated their life,
Mm,
when they were teenagers. And
yeah.
physically, you sort of become younger. They've
Yeah.
done lots of work on this. And I think that is a really important point you say there, because it is
Mm,
about finding yourself. And obviously, the self that you recognize is the one that's perhaps not now with us, but the
Yeah.
one that was earlier before we took on a load of other programming.
Mm.
See what I mean? So I think that's
Yeah.
a really interesting point.
I like that. I think that's a really good perspective, actually, that if you want to go back in time, this isn't a bad way of doing it, because you do feel younger. You do experience things that you thought, God, I haven't felt like that for years. I've definitely felt that on this most recent one. It changed me in other ways, and yeah, I think that's a really interesting perspective, that everyone's looking for youth and ways to
Yes,
stay younger. Well,
yes,
actually, it's all up here. You know, if you can
yeah,
find a way of reconnecting with that part of your brain that was that person, then you will be that young.
yeah,
That's how you're going to
yeah,
feel.
absolutely.
Mm,
That's it.
very
So
good, very good.
where could we get your book from then, Bob?
It's on Amazon. It's there's a Kindle downloadable, and there's a paperback that you can have. Truth and Heresy on Bobby's Camino by Bobby Morrell. It's 50,000 words of truth and heresy, and
Right.
it has some reasonable reviews. If you want to do a Camino, then my other book it's much lower cost, and it's simply top 12 tips for walking the Camino de Santiago. Just some simple things that will help you prepare for it. Some people have huge, immense backpacks, 100 liters of stuff. You don't need it. I had 26 liters, and it was more than enough for 5 weeks. So that's really important. And then I am going to write another one about this one that I've just walked. But the difference this time, Vic, is that this one will be a romance. So there you go.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Right. On that bombshell. That's wonderful.
Okay. Well,
I'll put
thanks
some
very
links
much.
in the show notes, Bob, as well. Right.
Great.
So that'd be
Excellent.
really
Thank you.
cool. And lovely to see you, mate.
And you.
And keep
And
well,
you.
won't you? All right.
Absolutely.
Don't
Take care.
disappear.
I
Don't
won't.
disappear. All right, mate.
Cheers.
Yes. Bye.